One of the
Tanya will
things that I
appreciate
think is
that.
so great about the way that Louisville does the council retreats is how you move around to different communities where there's something that you can learn from the experience in that particular place. And so obviously we're here in Dallas today. We're in the Statler Hotel, which is one of the really great redevelopment, revitalization projects. But where we're going to be going later on today is in Oak Cliff in the Bishop Arts District particularly. And we felt like as we thought about the various places where exciting things are happening in Dallas, we felt like Oak Cliff might have a lot of parallels and some lessons to learn for y'all in Louisville and thinking about some of your areas. So we have a great panel here this afternoon. What we're going to do is I'm going to go through a few kind of background slides here first to give you a little context about Oak Cliff in general. And then we'll introduce the panel, and each of them will give you sort of I've got a sort of opening question for each one of them. And then we've got a number of other questions, and you all feel free to ask questions as well. And then we will try to wrap this up at a time where we'll allow ourselves time to stop or go in a bus and see some of the places on our way to dinner tonight. So that'll be our plan. So Oak Cliff community, and they're just telling me that the building here, which has this wonderful mural and the wonderful history of Oak Cliff as a streetcar suburb, is Amanda's building, which I didn't know. So we've got Amanda's building right here up front in our presentation. So just to give you a little background sense. So here's the map with the region. Here's Louisville up here. You recognize, obviously, Dallas, Fort Worth, the North Texas area. That's basically where we are now in downtown Dallas. The area we'll be talking about in Oak Cliff is just a little bit to the southwest of where we are here. And so the Oak Cliff Gateway TIF is what is really sort of the area we're going to try to focus on a bit today. And so as you can see on the map here, this is south of the Trinity River, and Neil was making this comment earlier about Oak Cliff and the division of that the Trinity has been for Dallas. It's just west of I-35. The southern boundaries are generally north of 12th Street, and then it goes over. You can see from here the boundaries are move around on the streets, but generally east of Tyler or Sylvan and south of I-30. One of the things you'll hear about is that there are two parts to this district area, what's called the Oak Cliff Gateway that you see here in purple, and then the part that's called Bishop Jefferson. And I'm going to try to summarize these things based on my knowledge from years ago and assistance from the folks on the panel and also Sue Council from the city's Economic Development Department. If I misspeak, one of you guys can correct me. But the original TIF was created in 1992, just that Oak Cliff Gateway part, just the northern part of it, which was at the same time as City Place was created. And it originally was going to expire in 2012. Everyone thought this would be a prime location for development right by the Trinity and by Methodist Medical Center. So there were a number of reasons why it was identified to get started. These pictures are sort of what it looked like at that time, and you can see some of the reasons for concern about the area. And so that was kind of the starting point. It got a rather slow start, I think is fair to say. And so from 1990 till 96, the Dallas population increased by 3%. This area's population decreased by nearly 6%. As of 1997, the increment in the TIF, which you all understand how the increment goes, it was actually negative from where they had started. So there was a real challenge there. In 1997, there was the project plan and financing was approved. Part of that was a strategic implementation program, which I worked on with the folks at the city. And it created sort of a concept of what kind of development should be here. What they were expecting was largely residential with some assistance or expansion of Methodist and some supporting non-residential development. So that was sort of the general gist of the idea at that time. By 2009, they hadn't really achieved those goals, and that was coming up close to 2012, the extension of the TIF. So and all this information is in the handout we just provided you, but basically it wasn't doing as well as people had hoped. So they looked at a couple of things to change it. There were some things happening at that point that made it look like it was not worth just quitting it altogether. And so there were some revisions to the TIFs, changes in the guidelines, which Carl was intimately involved with. and that extended this TIF as well. And so since that time, there has been some progress, and you'll see some of this development as we go out, and you'll hear about some of the development from these folks. So the Zhang Triangle project, for example, is one of the projects in that Oak Cliff Gateway area that came about in that sort of second wave of the TIF. In 2014, it was expanded again to include this Bishop Jefferson sub-district with the Bishop Arts area where we will be tonight, as well as the Jefferson Boulevard corridor, which I hope we will see if we have time on our route. And it has provided support from that TIF for a number of projects, and this is what you'll definitely be hearing about. So there's a couple of pictures in here. We've had some in your background, and Jim, Lake, and Amanda have provided you some additional materials on that. But there's a significant amount of mixed-use development that's now happening in the Bishop Arts area. This is project phase 1. Bishop Arts Station, one of the other dynamics here is the extension of the streetcar down to the Bishop Arts area. That's been another driver in terms of the revitalization that's going on here. So there's been a lot of that, but it has happened over a long period of time, I would say. And there's some catalysts that got things moving at certain points. I think there's also some lessons that they have learned that may be relevant for you as you think about Old Town, as you think about that area of Old Town where we'll have the small area plan discussion tomorrow, the TOD area by the GCTA station, and as well some of those corridors, 121, Mill, and some of those other ones. So there's a number of successes now, and when you go down there tonight, you will see a lot of progress that's been made. These are just a few of the things that you'll see when you go there, and I think these numbers are telling. These are the numbers from the report just presented to the Dallas Council this week, that right now there's a 186% increase over the adjusted base for the combined districts. So that's come quite a long way. That's really a dramatic change from what I was describing to you earlier. So that gives you just a little bit of a background on the Oak Cliff area, and one move into giving you a chance to hear from and interact with the panelists who are here. And I'm so delighted that they are all here, because they are really the people who were here, who were doing the work, who know the ins and outs, and can really help contribute a lot to your ideas about what you might do and what might be effective to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce the panelists just briefly. You've had the bios, I think, for most of them in your packet. But I want to introduce and ask them an introductory question, ask for a brief answer, and then we'll go into some more of a roundabout, free-for-all kind of a discussion. So our first panelist is David Cossum. David is sitting down here at the end. In your packet, I think we had listed that Teresa O'Donnell would be here. David is obviously not Teresa. But David is the Director of Sustainable Development and Construction for the City of Dallas. David has been with the city for a long time, has been very involved in all of the details, was actively engaged in all of the zoning aspects and the development aspects in this area. And so he has a great long-term perspective on what's happened and what have been some of the things to make it work, and what are some of those things to know about. So David, let me start out by asking you, how does Oak Cliff today compare to what you guys were hoping for, what you thought was going to be coming? If I can ask you to use the mics as we talk, because we are going to record and videotape. David?
Sure, and it is a work in progress, and both Amanda and Jim have been there really since before day one, dating back to, we adopted, I think, the Conservation District, which was a tool to help preserve the core of Bishop Arts in '92, I want to say. And basically that, again, just tried to preserve that mid-century architecture feel that you see in some of the slides that you just viewed. And here recently, it was just strange driving down Zhang and seeing 3 construction cranes in Oak Cliff. I mean, it's just something we did not see on that side of the Trinity, specifically in that near North Oak Cliff area, except for Methodist on occasional expansion. But right there at the corner of Davis and Zhang, sure enough, there were all these construction cranes all of a sudden. So we certainly see the fruits of the efforts that the private development community has put into it. as well as the efforts with the streetcar and other things that have helped facilitate that. So I think where you'll be tonight is just keeps that cool vibe, if you will, the North Oak Cliff vibe, the Bishop Arts vibe in place, and try to encourage adaptive reuse of many of those buildings through our existing parking delta credits, which basically grandfathers those buildings that were constructed prior to the development of the zoning code with parking regulations, as well as create breaks for any type of adaptive reuse if they did increase the parking at all that were built into that ordinance to help stimulate some of that adaptive reuse of those buildings for what they're really has added life to that area.
And then, Carl, I'm going to ask you to go next. Carl has been with the city's Economic Development Department for many, many years and was the Economic Development Manager overseeing all of the different city TIFs and has recently announced his retirement, but as the history and the long-term view of that, of what's happened. And so, Carl, were there particular changes in the market, or what were the sort of economic things, and what were those incentives for?
Redevelopment is closer, better. That's kind of fun. Now, redevelopment is a very kind of iterative process that, the way I like to think about it is, how can you create a neighborhood that you would be comfortable and you would be really enjoy being in? So if you're, what happened in the North Oak Cliff area in Bishop Arts is, years and years ago, before, the zoning changes, there were conservation district, historic districts, where people started to claim a lot of the older, beautiful homes. And you got more people moving in, there weren't any places to shop. Bishop Arts came in, and, what happened there, and I let Jim and Amanda tell you about, the things they did to make the area unique. But you created a lot of restaurant space, which the people that were living there really were crying for. So you have a great place, you have great homes to live in, and you add some great places to eat. You start getting places to shop, and things keep expanding, and pretty soon everybody wants to be there. So, I think when you're doing redevelopment, you always have to build from the good. So you figure out what parts of the community are unique and things that can't be replicated everywhere. You build on that, you move outward, you do a little bit at a time. The thing that's difficult is building things that aren't really connected. So, it's a shame that Louisville, the train station is so far away from all the good stuff that's happening in the kind of little Main Street core. But, it's, that's the issue. How you build from the good and get to other things that have a lot of potential.
So then our next panelist is Jim Lake, and Jim is the CEO and partner of Jim Lake Companies, and one of the major developers who's really turned this area around, as well as the design district and a number of other places too. Jim, so as a developer, what got you persuaded to invest in Oak Cliff? What got you?
We got involved. It was actually my father's idea when we first invested back in 1985. And I brokered the property to it. One of the reasons I gave you that handout, if you look at that picture, that's a before and after picture, the boarded up buildings is where we're going tonight. And those are the ones that we purchased. And those are the ones that we purchased back in 1985. There's the before and after. So you'll see that's the corner where Hattie's is right now. So a lot of things, had to happen for that to be successful. The city certainly helped. The desire was you had a budget that was very inexpensive. And artists typically lead into areas that are inexpensive and a little bit edgy maybe. And so that was the vision, and to create a place for artists to come originally. And when we first redeveloped it, we did it on our own nickel. We had no TIF for help from the city. It was a very difficult time because you remember what happened in 1986. It's something called the 86 Tax Act. which took all the investment out of real estate. We had a real estate depression for the next 5 to 6 years. But we were able to hold on to it and tough it through. And as things evolved, we made a few additional purchases. And I know Mando talked about what she did across the street. I think that a couple things you may get to it later, but I'll go ahead and it's kind of part of the story that makes sense. Is why is Bishop Arts successful? Where you had ownership between us, we own 95% of the original Bishop Arts District. And so you have solid long-term ownership. And we also very particular about who we lease to. And we don't duplicate tenants, and most of the tenants are sole proprietorships. We require the owner to be there, and certainly most of the time. Makes it unique. When you walk in a place tonight, you'll see one of the owners will be there tonight when we go to Tillman's. And then also, David, I think that you mentioned the 92 zoning. I think the other couple of things that happened were in 1998 when we got the zoning, the zoning change number 3 or 4 maybe.
Yeah.
And we did a parking reduction because we originally developed that. We did have service businesses that we had travel agencies, offices, kind of that sort of thing. And then once it started evolving, and when we got the zoning change, the parking reduction basically half. And then when you look at that picture, you can see the difference. The city did they passed a bond package in 2000 and put the street trees in, made pedestrian friendly, wider sidewalks, and the lights and that sort of thing. Once those two things happened, we started to see a change and began to spur additional development across the district.
Those that you know about the project.
The general operation of the project. Okay, and then our fourth panelist is Amanda Moreno-Lake. And Amanda is Vice President of Operations at Jim Lake Company. And she is also one of the City of Dallas representatives on the DART board. So I'm interested, Amanda, in your thoughts about your development, but also about the role of mobility, that streetcar and some of the other mobility kind of investments in this revitalization.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having us. As far as redevelopment is concerned, I think I started in 1989. So Jim's correct. A lot of the restaurateurs that were there, I think it was just Jimmy's Bishop Grill and Vito's. I think Tillman's was there. But it is a public-private partnership. It's not something that happens overnight. We do control most of it, but we make sure that we don't lease to hobbyists. We make sure that the people that are leasing are going to be people that are serious about business. I think when the city spent $2.1 million in the pavers and the trees and the landscaping, the reduction, it made a really big difference. Because those old buildings, there's no parking at all. There's 0 lot lines. These buildings are 0 lot lines. So if that wouldn't have happened, I don't think that these buildings would be able to redevelop. So creating a PD, a planned development area, would be something that I would highly recommend, and make sure that the type of uses that are going there are going to be uses that are what the district is going to want. Louisville, it's a beautiful little town. I've been there. In fact, a partner of mine owns a bunch of real estate there. So, creating a PD and doing a public partnership and working together and making sure that the infrastructure is in place whenever you start redeveloping, when you start putting a mixed-use development of a residential component, it's extremely important that the infrastructure is in place. As far as mobility is concerned, obviously, transportation is extremely important for any municipality. In Bishop Arts, transportation, the streetcar wasn't there at that time. But making it pedestrian friendly and walkable space is extremely important, and even activating alleys. We don't have, our alleys are not usable there in Bishop Arts. So we try to, we do it, I shouldn't say it in front of David, but we use the alleys.
Okay. Try to stay out of the way.
Alleys to be able to put benches and planters and light and make it, I think more inviting.
Okay, great. So that gives you a little bit of a flavor of each of the panelists' involvement in Oak Cliff and in these particular areas. I have a list of some questions to ask them, but I want to invite all of you to join in ask the follow-up questions, or if there are other questions you'd like to ask to be able to get the most out of their experience. Several of you mentioned the issue of parking. And so one of the things I know is often the case in these older areas is that the zoning, the old zoning that was in place and some of those regulations can really get in the way and create some barriers to the kind of development that one would hope to see. You mentioned a little bit about the parking, but can you all talk a little more about how you address the regulatory issues and what kind of flexible changes of PD or other things that have helped with the development that's there now? You want to start?
I'll jump in.
Well, David, we'll let the professional do it.
And they can contradict me. Yeah. No, I mean, parking is an issue. We experience it both as it's a good problem, right? I mean, it means you're successful in balancing existing neighborhoods around some of these old commercial corridors, which is what we want them to be. I mean, it's difficult in this Amazon era where the strip retail, particularly the old commercial, used to balance out between restaurants and retail stores. But, you know, now a lot of the retail has just gone online, if you will, and the most viable use for many of these spaces is a service use such as restaurants. So that's a struggle, and recognizing that, you know, fortunately, particularly here in the past past 5 years, you know, it is a new generation of folks that are traveling. There's a lot of the use with Uber. You know, the bikes are certainly helping make a dent in some of that. The transit certainly has helped with that, but particularly when you're redeveloping some of these older buildings, the use of Delta credits only goes so far. And by Delta credits, we're just saying if I was originally a building that was a warehouse, if you will, then I'm blessed with that amount of parking that I didn't have. But if I was a warehouse, that was pretty minimal. So now I'm redeveloping with a use such as a restaurant. Even if I'm grandfathered based on the warehouse use, I'm still way under parked. So it is something that the zoning can help address by encouraging that, and part of that is just encouraging that mix. So maybe you don't require parking at all for retail use, because you know the restaurant use that you are going to park is going to help balance that out, and typically those hours hopefully benefit each other. With the retail uses slow down, the restaurant uses pick up. So that was certainly a tool that was utilized in Bishop Arts, where let's just activate these buildings, and if we can do it through parking discounts for retail, and then reduce the parking, basically cut in half, a little more than half, for what we would typically require for a restaurant, which is 1 to 100. The Bishop Arts area itself is 1 to 220 now. And again, utilizing their deltas in that, hopefully that, there's still issues, don't get me wrong, but it is a critical part of reactivating particularly these old commercial structures. And you know, we've also addressed our shared parking agreements within the city of Dallas. In order for me to have remote parking, both property owners have to basically enter into a deed restriction, a covenant, if you will, filed at the county. And if you're dealing with lenders, I've now committed my site to parking. It's a burden, right? So Bishop Arts is one of the first places we experimented with allowing parking to be done by long-term lease. And then when a CO renews, you know, it might be an issue for somebody if perhaps that building since we don't have as much control as we used to. But really it is a burden for folks to try to enter into those really formal remote parking agreements that we had for good reason, because you wanted to make sure the parking was there if we were giving them credit for it. But at the same time, it did seem to be holding back some of the development. So those are some of the tools certainly we used.
Also giving credit for parking spaces, it really tried to, if you put X amount of bike racks, that would be considered one parking space. So being flexible with that type of creative thinking and putting it in that PD or that district.
Well, I have an answer. Will you restate your question? I want to make sure I answer it.
Pass on the mic.
I'll go ahead.
I was asking about the regulatory barriers and the
Okay,
changes that.
okay, I got it. I want to there wasn't anything else. I've got,
As long as we're also focusing on the parking, that you can tell us a little about that parking lot maybe.
okay, thanks. You always say, and you kind of hit it on, David. I always say, particularly these urban areas, if you don't have a parking problem, you got a problem. Right? And so, but you got to figure out how to solve it. You don't just solve it with one way. We're doing a really pilot for the city right now, where we're doing a community-wide valet. So we just almost on our year anniversary and tweaking it, and that's becoming successful, well accepted. It's a process, but that's one thing. But you know what? You're not going to solve parking with any one thing. When those, we going back to the when we did the reductions, we really looked at how did people get there back when these buildings were built, about the turn of the century. They didn't get there necessarily by car. They got there by a streetcar. That picture that you're looking at, that's according to used to be a streetcar back in the old trolley system that we used to have in Dallas. Or you got there with bikes, or you walked, or a carriage sometimes. And so it's going to be more than just one. It's going to be a shuttle probably in the future. It's going to be valet. It's going to be bicycles. It's going to be a streetcar that's 1 block away. Going for just a couple blocks, from where we are right now. And then the regulatory question would be one of zoning. And I think that I was interesting with the way you did you started out with a TIF. I think what is even more impactful that really mirrors pretty much those same areas that you spoke of was the zoning. I mean, we talked about the CD number 7 that is the Bishop Arts Conservation District. And what we did, but we collectively were all involved in it, in a zoning case that is really, I think, the template for all the change, for all the cranes that are over there right now. And we did that's actually, David, I don't know if you know this, but that's where I first met both you and my wife, 2008, a zoning case that we got appointed to and worked on for 2 years, from 2008 to 2010. And what we did was we took components of the Bishop Arts zoning, we spread it down 2.5 miles on Davis. Okay, on Davis, and going all the way down to where the Kessler, if you know where that is. And what we did, we had 8 different sub-districts. Is somewhat controversial, but we catered to each specific neighborhood. It was different because you have all these historic neighborhoods, some more residential, some more commercial, and we got it to the finish line. And that was in 2010. Now you look what has come afterwards, and it worked. And it provided a template for that. We said we wanted density, and we've got density coming. And
Time out.
okay. So anyway, I think that's very important to me. The zoning piece with the PDs is what she mentioned earlier. So
It's great, I don't have to talk that much, but so there's a number of things to really think about when you're looking at parking. Number one, if you look at all the successful kind of urban entertainment and retail areas in Dallas, there are parking issues. You look at Lower Greenville, you can look at Deep Ellum, you look at Bishop Arts, you look at Trinity Grove to some extent, and it'll continue to get worse. It's because there's a lot of people that want to go there. You look at parking if you go to a mall, you look at parking if you go to a big strip center. There's a big sea of parking. You're walking through a really inhospitable environment to get where you want to go. In these areas where there's urban fabric and the city takes care to design things the right way, where there's doors that open onto the street, there's windows, people will walk farther because there's things to look at in the windows, there's things to do, there's restaurants to stop at. So the design is really essential that you get that right, you get the details right, so you create an environment that is bigger than kind of the sum of the parts. The city in the past has also worked with developers, and the city of Dallas really doesn't want to be in the parking business. We are one of the few big cities that doesn't really own any public lots downtown. We haven't really wanted to do that, but we lease property, we lease parking at the Dow Park garage down the street. We reduce parking rates. We have an arrangement with Garage by Third Rail Lofts. We've talked with developers in the areas that build parking to maybe build an extra floor, make some of that available for the public. the city has not been able to make a deal to do that, but that's an option. But I think the real key thing and why parking has worked is you create a good environment, people will walk a little bit farther.
That's right. And we've got covered a number of things, but let me see if some of you all want to jump in on the conversation with some questions. And also, looking back here, Nika, Richard, any of y'all have some questions or want to follow up on any of that discussion about the parking and regulatory kinds of issues?
One thing I can comment on parking is, you talked about the sea of parking. Is when you're walking down the street, there's storefront after storefront of people and activity, and you can see it, they can see it. This creates a natural sense of safety. And and other people that are out walking too, so that just adds to the safety factor. And I think that's a big element of making that work, is feeling comfortable. It's not like walking between cars and going, who's on the next aisle over, you know. It's just that comfort zone.
So maybe if I could ask you to talk a little bit about some of the city infrastructure improvements that were made. You mentioned some of the pedestrian improvements, for example. Which ones of those city improvements had the biggest impact on attracting the kind of the appeal and the development that's there now?
I would say the sidewalk when the city expanded. When the city expanded the sidewalk for it to be 12 feet instead of 0 lot line inch driving up and parking. I think that made it more pedestrian friendly and more walkable. I think that had a huge impact to make Bishop Arts what it is today.
So infrastructure is a big deal, and certainly the sidewalks in terms of activating the old commercial district was critical. What enables some of the new development that you'll see when you drive down tonight, though, is other infrastructure, whether it's stormwater, which was something desperately needed, as well as water and sewer upgrades to accommodate some of the new development. Now, that's hard, right? Because now I'm tearing up streets right in front of their businesses they work so hard to get done. And it's a challenge. And, you know, fortunately there, we've got a council member that kind of maybe coordinates a lot of discussions between the existing businesses and the construction activity. That's certainly a role the city can more actively participate in and should. Even, you know, downtown today, we have those same types of issues where we get more and more residents involved. It's more and more of an inconvenience, whereas downtown used to be empty at night and you could do all this work. No, that's no longer the case. So clearly for the higher density development, there were other infrastructure improvements that were necessary. And it is a tough situation when you're to install those for that period of time, and frequently it will be 6 months of the year, perhaps longer. You've got to be sensitive to those existing businesses that really were the frontier, if you will, the pioneers of that area. And it's hard, but it's something you got to work on and coordinate with those businesses as that happens.
I think you all are really coming at a great time, because when we go over there tonight, like everything to the south of Bishop is under construction and all the streets are torn up. And it's a result of the city of Dallas and their utilities, but it's in another year it's going to be great. But the city of Dallas has been really great on allocating bond money over to these urban areas, particularly with that's what you'll see. I mean, it is a result, I think, of a $4 million bond package that's kind of coordinating with one of the developments that's ongoing just south of Bishop Arts on Bishop. That's going to, it will connect pedestrians from Bishop Arts up to Jefferson. You know, David, the other night I was over there, and people were already walking up to 9th Street, and just 3 more blocks will be up to Jefferson Boulevard. And so one of the projects that's ongoing right now that's being impactful is doing the complete street project, which is more of what you saw in that brochure that I sent out with the wider sidewalks, the street trees, the lights, the benches, the parking on the street to be a buffer, which is important to have the pedestrians have that safety feeling from the cars that are going by. And then also on there's another project that's under construction that is another $1.2 million, I think. The city's doing the same type of thing on Jefferson Boulevard for a 2-block area. If you know where the Texas Theater is, that block and actually 2 other blocks right now are under construction on working that to be more pedestrian friendly and landscaping and lighting and that sort of thing. So those are all under construction, so come back in a year and you'll see the difference that it's made.
From the city standpoint, one thing that I see as a big caution for every city is that you don't get out in front of yourself when you do things. So when the city put bond money to redo the sidewalks, put in pedestrian lights in Bishop Arts, it was 15 years after the owners had invested and got good retail tenants, had got good restaurants, and that helped bring things up to a new level and also helped increase the the taxes coming in to pay for it. In a lot of cases, just because you put in wider sidewalks and street trees and all that, doesn't mean you're going to get any development. It doesn't mean you're going to get any more property tax. It doesn't mean you're going to get any more sales tax. To me, the prudent way to do it is that, we have money some way that, targeted, priority, where you do this associated with this development, you have a plan eventually, so the development comes in, the new taxes are going to pay for the infrastructure that's put into place. And that's going to reduce your risk and kind of help your money go a little bit farther. One other thing that, to me, it's not really infrastructure that's made a big difference, is, as Bishop Arts has become established, there's really been other kind of nodes that have been established on the street. One of the things that I was real proud of was working with the Kessler Theater, which created another little node of activity about a mile, a quarter of a mile, 3/4 of a mile to the west on West Davis. And the Kessler has brought in a bunch of activity. There's a number of restaurants that have kind of sprung up and maybe were there before, but have been improved on in that area. You look to the east of Bishop Arts, and with the big zoning change, and there's a big zoning change that we really haven't talked about in detail. But what it did was it identified some areas where it allowed greater density, and the greater density, because of all the other things, great residential neighborhoods that have become very solid and super organized over the years, all the retail in Bishop Arts, the Kessler and other things, it's created a market where apartment, people who want to live in apartments want to be there. So, you bring in more people and it's going to bring on another round of retail activity. The city's been talking to Central Market about bringing a grocery store. And if you would have said Central Market was going to come into North Oak Cliff when I started at the city 21 years ago, people would have been like, yeah, it's never going to happen. But, it's just, you get the people and you kind of step by step, you move things ahead. But it's not, that is, so now you guys came in 85, so that's, 30 years ago, over 30 years ago. So redevelopment takes a long time. And, one other thing I'll throw out there is, if you're familiar with the State Thomas area, State Thomas was only 90 acres. It was about 25 years to fill up that area. City Place is about 160 acres. That is about a 30-year project as far as filling up every plot. I looked at the area that Karen sent, and it's huge. I don't know how many acres, but I think if you look at things, it's coming up with pieces that you can change and positively impact. Because if you get an area that's too big, it's like taking your balloons and throwing up in the air and they'll go all over. but you're not, at the end of the day, you're not gonna see any difference. So it's picking out something, really concentrating on it, like Bishop Arts, and being able to say, wow, this is a great thing, this is something I want to live by, you know, if it was you. And, you know, if you can create something like that, more good things are going to happen.
I think also whenever, on the PD, we had a lot of auto industry uses on Davis. And so what we did is we made them non-conforming. So if they sold to someone else, then that type of use would not be an allowable use. While the same owner is there, they can continue on. So we didn't put it in an amortization chart, we just made it non-conforming, and I think that a lot of those properties started selling, and they became non-conforming, and they made it to a higher, better use.
TJ, it looked like you might have had a question.
I've got a couple, and they may not be relevant, so bear with me if I get in the weeds. Some of the challenges that we have is activating some of these older spaces, and as you mentioned, retail is, unless it's entertainment or a unique retail experience, boring retail's dead. So we're seeing a lot of our spaces where if we're going to activate them, now we've got a $30,000 grease trap we got to deal with. And did you guys run into any of that? Did you finance that? Did you use the tiers funding or some other mechanism? How did you activate or make those changes?
So grease traps are extremely expensive. So what we've done in Waxahachie, in Bishop Arts, we some of those we used. There was Trapzillas. I know on his there was Trapzillas. Sorry, David, but they're Trapzillas. We ended up putting I had to put huge grease traps. What we're doing in Waxahachie and in Ennis, we talked to the city and we asked them, is because they're doing all the infrastructure now, we asked them to do what they call a shared grease trap. And I think we did it you did it on Jefferson Towers, and it means that all the uses on the first floor, we know that they're going to be service businesses, but they're going to in the future turn into either a coffee shop or a little restaurant. So what we did is the city allowed us to do a shared grease trap that we were able to tie all the retail businesses to it eventually when it comes. So that really works, and it's the city of Ennis is actually now they're spending $8.1 million in their infrastructure. We're about to start redeveloping Ennis, and we talked to them, and the commissioners there are allowing us to do a shared grease trap, and that's exactly what is going to be successful, because that's very expensive. So a lot of the restaurateurs, once they get a restaurant, they're successful, they'll stay, they'll never leave. And sometimes you want change, so you want change, but no. If the city can help with that shared grease trap, that would be great. And even allowing it to put it in the alley. I know a lot of municipalities don't want to use that, but if your alley is not activated and is not usable, so why not give an easement and allow the grease traps to be out in the alley?
I think look at what Ennis did.
I know you're saying no.
Because they're fronting the money. They're actually installing a series of the shared grease traps in their downtown. So we did all of our own, and so some of them are out in the parking lot, some of them are inside the building, and
Yes.
Yeah.
We're all over the
And-
we can't tell David because then he'll go and sit us in a code compliance.
So
I'm taking notes here. So it is a big problem, and where do you put them? Particularly in these commercial districts that are basically lot line to lot line. So yes, you have to make allowances, perhaps if they need to go in the right of way. Now the issue that maybe we're more stubborn about, I guess, is not so much a zoning issue at all. It's really the plumbing code issue of crossing lot lines and doing that, and trying to adapt, have local amendments perhaps to accommodate some of those situations, because just the building codes and plumbing codes themselves kind of frown upon any type of anything crossing the lot line. So, but that's not to say it's insurmountable.
but in direct response to your question, all the initial development in Bishop Arts really didn't receive any subsidy from the city. So the developers came in and they did everything themselves. The city has provided some subsidy for the new apartments and the denser development that's going in, and that's been due to a couple of factors. One is because the area's been successful, the price of land has skyrocketed. So people have a lot more basis in their projects. The other thing is, for projects taking city money, we require extra, greater improvements to the infrastructure. The developers spend more money, plus they do mixed income housing, which they provide some affordable units, which is really kind of a double hit on a project. Number one, you lose the revenue in the short term, but the second thing that it does, which probably affects more of the developers that we have worked with, is that many of the developers who do apartments are kind of merchant builders. They come in, they build a project, they stabilize it, and then in 3 years they'll sell it to some institutional investor. If you have units that are rent restricted for 15 years, you're losing net income. You take the cap rate to that, and you lose millions and millions of dollars on the sale. And that's the reason there's been subsidies on those.
Okay. And then kind of a follow-up to one of the challenges I think we have, which may be unique to us, I don't know, is we have our old town starting to be kind of cool, and now we're getting like businesses that aren't retail or not service. It's somebody's office, and he's like, I want an office right here. What are you letting them do that? Because to us it just sucks all the wind right out of
That's a great question. I think one of the beauties, again, of Bishop Arts is we own most of it in the existing or the original Bishop Arts. So we originally did start that way. We had office spaces, we had travel agencies and a newspaper and those kind of things. But as it's about becoming an entertainment district and a destination, we're very particular on who comes in. And the answer is, to the extent that we can control it, no. Right now we've got a small little, because of the pricing, we have a small little market that we did, a little artisans market that we built out with small little spaces that are more affordable so that the creatives can come in and do something. But I think the mix is extremely important. And again, it's taken a long time. For us, long before the right mix, I would say at least 20 years of some hits and misses. We're continually looking at our mix to make sure that it's working. If there's somebody lagging, then we make a change where necessary. So we're continually trying to make ourselves a little bit better. But you're right. The office space does not generate any destination. There is certainly a place for it, right? In certain districts or zones that in your historic properties, and sometimes that's the first in. That may be the first in, and then maybe over time something else. The prices go up, and the office guys get priced out, and then you're doing retail of some type.
I would make a recommendation that if you're thinking about creating a PD, is that you start thinking about a manufacturing use. People think of manufacturing use as manufacturing steel, but there's a lot of breweries that are considered manufacturing. A lot of the wineries, they're manufacturing, or cider, they're manufacturing cider. So to be able to be specific on what your type of uses are one, and manufacturing would be one that I would definitely consider.
Thank you.
Amanda mentioned a few minutes ago that one of the areas along here had a lot of auto-oriented uses and that changed to non-conforming. Tell us a little more about what happened or what went on with the uses that were already there but were not compatible with the future vision.
Do you want to?
Auto and others like that.
Sure. And there were a lot of automotive uses down Davis. It was Highway 80, right, at one point. And that's what we had back then. And they also, though, sometimes can make some pretty cool, spaces for other uses in the future. In Bishop Arts, we did not, as Amanda pointed out, did not amortize anything. They did become non-conforming, and eventually the market catches up, and there's a higher and better use for that those users will eventually realize and profit from. We've taken different approaches in different parts of the city. Ross Avenue is another area that's evolved outside of the Arts District as you move further east, where there was a more proactive stance on amortization of some of the automotive-related uses. You know, I think we got to about the same point at the same time, to be honest with you, using either tool. But really, it's going to be the market that ultimately brings these non-conforming uses. And the more successful that you can spur things along, then but it's certainly possible just to no longer allow them and let them fade away, if you will.
The thing that's going to drive the change is the population around the area. You know, you can have so many visitors come for the, you know, kind of for the uniqueness of the, you know, the area, but having, you know, more density in the neighborhood, more people around is going to provide the kind of customers that come back and keep the businesses going. My son, who's in college now, about 12 years ago, we're driving down to West Davis. He said, so your job is to take these poor businessmen and drive them out of business so we can get some, you know, some rich people in here to have fancy restaurants. And I said, well, no, it's really not my job. It's the change is going to happen that as the neighborhood changes, and the North Oak Cliff area has really been changing. And, you know, whether the city was involved or not, as areas, as the characteristics of the populations of a neighborhood change, the retail needed to serve that population is going to change. And businesses in the Davis corridor and Bishop Arts that adapted to the changes in the neighborhood have survived and really thrived. There's other businesses like the car lots, you know, and the car sales, the car repair, where they were really on sites that didn't work very well for their business. There wasn't any place to store the cars. There wasn't any place to work on them. You know, eventually, as the price of the land got up, it didn't make any economic sense for them to be there. So, you know, whether the city gets involved or not, there's still overriding economic real estate things that happen that are going to change the market one way or another.
I'll just make one comment on that. I think just as a philosophically on the change, people don't like change, right? I mean, it's a process and it takes a long time. But I think when you go to Bishop Arts, we focus on all that today, but it's really, really small. I mean, most of our spaces over there are 1,500 to 2,500 square feet. Tillman's that we're going to tonight is the largest space at 4,500 square feet that's in Bishop Arts proper right now. So a lot of small space. And so do things small. You don't have to do it all at once. Using the example of the Bishop Davis zoning, I mean, even though it was 2.5 miles, we made it small, customized to each neighborhood. You don't have to do it all at once, and it takes time. And these uses will change over time. But if you provide the template, you know, a guide, and also I'll go ahead in case we don't get it till later. But one of the challenges that we have is applying current building codes to buildings that are built back in 1910. It just doesn't work. And so you've got to figure out how to make that work, and whether it's ordinances or certain credits, and then you have, a lot of times you have historic districts that have historic limitations. So you've got to, or ADA. You know, how do you put the ramp in this space with stairs that's only 1,000 square feet? And you know, those are challenges. So but the uses, I think, they'll change over time, but just I think be patient, provide a template, and it'll happen over a long period of time.
Well, the first thing, Jim,
I should warn you all that Neil grew up in Oak Cliff.
Okay, Neil.
I'm a Dallas native. I'm related to John E. LeBron, and if you go out to East Dallas and see Ferguson Road, that's my family. So I'm very deep-rooted in Dallas, 5 generations of Dallas. Jim, I know you grew up in Dallas too, very involved with like the Parks Board and Appraisal District. I forget what, 60 60 other things. But I was wondering, there's a lot of, I mean, I can look around Dallas, I know it well, and say, well, there's a lot of places I could have gone and said, maybe do something here, maybe do something here. What made you focus on Bishop Arts? Why did you, out of all of the possible opportunities in Dallas, knowing Dallas as a native, what made you choose Bishop Arts?
Okay, thank you. And both of us born and raised in Dallas. We have a really interesting story. I mean, she grew up in West Dallas. I grew up in North Dallas. And we just met back in 2008. And again, we own property across from each other. But the reason I mention that is because I understood, again, it was my father's vision. He was the one that put the property under contract and put the initial deal together. And then I took it to the finish line and did a lot of redevelopment in the design district. But then started to focus on other properties over in Oak Cliff. And so we're one of the few redevelopers that operate on both sides, or used to operate on both sides of the river. We understood being from Dallas, it was just a stigma to come across the river. And even back in 1986, when we talked about, I mean, you could not only industry-wide could you not lease space, but particularly in southern Dallas, you couldn't give it away. And so there used to be something called the Oak Cliff. There is something called the Oak Cliff O, right? You used to say you're from Oak Cliff. They go, oh, you're from Oak Cliff. So now when you say you're from Oak Cliff, they go, oh, you're from Oak Cliff. Cool.
Yeah, Oak Cliff the only area Oak Cliff could always look down on was the Grove. So.
That's right. So we learned on it, and I think that I guess one of the things we were kind of stuck with it. I signed personal guarantees on all the notes, so had to keep working with it, and then it started to evolve, and we kind of got a good thing going and made some additional purchases. Then more recently, if we go by the Jefferson Tower project, at the time when we did Jefferson Tower, it's a block that's historic block, 5 blocks south of Bishop Arts. It was a little bit dicey up there, and nobody was doing anything, and rents were pretty low, and you had a scary element at nighttime up there, and now that's changed. And so I think one of the things that Amanda and I do, we learned, and she did it one way and I did another way, but we both came to the same place. Having done what we did with Bishop Arts over a long period of time, it's not risky or scary for us to go to another urban downtown area that's boarded up. We did that in Waxahachie and executed that, and we'll do something over there in Ennis and some others. So I think having just our experience on what we did with Bishop Arts gives us the confidence to go take it to other municipalities. Hope that answers your question.
Okay, so one of the questions that I'm interested in hearing about is what of the decisions or the investments that you made, which ones had unintended consequences, and how did you deal with them? Things that happened that you weren't expecting to have, what you bought, what you invested in, what you designed, city or private, either one.
I would say for us, when we went to redevelop in downtown Waxahachie, their infrastructure wasn't in place, and it was something that was painful and costly. So yes, that was because
That
there,
was unintended.
and I don't even know why we didn't even think of that. I mean, we just figured because they redeveloped a lot of their streets and there's been so much construction, we figured that they had redone their infrastructure, and that wasn't the case. And so we have people living on the second floor, and all these toilets started flushing, and it was a mess, but we got through it.
Okay. I would use the Waxahachie as the example where we learned a few more things. And it would be infrastructure. There was one particular case where we had a building built around 1895, 1900s, a beautiful old building built out of concrete and marble. It used to be an old bank, and so we converted it to a restaurant, and in the process, even though it was solid rock, we were required to put a sprinkler system in it after we'd already renovated the beautiful ceiling with all the
Oh, yeah. Forgot about that.
the cool
Cost us
ceiling, and
$100,000.
so we had to slap a sprinkler system on top of this beautiful ceiling, and you hit your head on it and all kinds of crazy stuff. But that would be one in my mind. And then again, the thing more general would be that infrastructure out in the street. You know, if you're going to have people living in most of what we do in the smaller municipalities is we do a lot of lofts on the second story and just make sure that your pipes are good.
Yeah. And it puts eyes in the street. When you have you add a residential component, and even in a downtown area, to add that, it put eyes on the street. So it makes it safer when you have people actually living in your district or in the downtown area. That's the reason we haven't redeveloped the Texas Theater that we have from Waxahachie, because that is a wood structure and their infrastructure is not in place. So we've told them, fix your infrastructure and then we'll redevelop it.
I don't know if this is part of this question or not, but, you know, certainly one of the things that, if zoning is an investment, right, is beware of the newest zoning fad, if you will. I think, you know, form districts captured the imagination of, you know, people all over the country for good reason. I mean, I think Bishop Arts is a prime example of that. They wanted to replicate the feeling of old commercial corridors. So what we've implemented in Oak Cliff and the Oak Cliff Gateway is kind of a hybrid. And what you need is adaptability. Unless you have the privilege of Frisco, where you have a green field and you can slap all your buildings up however you want to, form districts in developed areas, you just need to be careful that you allow enough adaptability. And Jim and Amanda have recently gone through this on one of their projects, which is a great project to redo a historic house. So as you look to the future and you want to replicate some of these old ideas of the commercial district, just make sure you've got the adaptability built into these ordinances. And we're learning slowly, and I think it's not just a Dallas problem, it's a national problem that all of a sudden everybody made these form districts that were supposed to emphasize just the form and be less rigid about the uses. Now we have such rigid form, and how do you bring a existing building to conformance with a build to? So it's just, if you can build in enough flexibility where you can make reasonable decisions about redevelopment in terms of meeting the intent of the ordinance, but allowing some flexibility that no, I don't need exactly 80% of the block face to be built at somewhere between 10 and 15 feet back of the street. Because there's going to be unique situations, and you know, we've done, even in Oak Cliff Gateway, I'm not sure how many PD sub-districts at this point, but we have a love and hate, or I have a love-hate relationship with PDs. They certainly enable very creative
We
things.
have a love and hate relationship. Sometimes
Yes.
I just love them and sometimes I just don't.
It's like zoning. We're like zoning. So that's just kind of something that you need to keep in mind as you look at your zoning ordinances. I think make sure you have some adaptability. You know, I think the forum is a great concept. Get eyes on the street. Reactivate the street. At the same time, you've got to have that adaptability on how to deal with existing structures and slowly bring them as they redevelop. If they can come into compliance, great. But allow for some type of redevelopment or addition to those without requiring a whole bureaucratic process to take care of it. I think I heard an amen next to me. I'm not sure.
Okay.
One of the things that I think smaller towns in Dallas have as a big advantage is if you can figure out a way to be flexible as you listen to the people that are actually developing the property. We have rules for a purpose. We want people to be safe in the buildings. We want the buildings to be constructed so they don't fall down. But you know, when you're looking at building codes with a little bit of common sense, you know, when you're looking at a building that's 100 years old or more, you know, how can you meet the intent of what the code is and still let people do things that make sense? And it's really tough in a city like Dallas because we're so big, we have to treat everybody a certain way, otherwise things would get so out of control, it would be horrible. But you have an advantage in being still a big city, but small enough where you can look at things and figure out a way that makes sense to accomplish specific purposes. And back to the question, when the city set up the Oak Cliff Gateway TIF district, it was, it's actually one where we learned lessons on how not to do things in a way. The district was set up, and this kind of the way is my impression of, as a retired person, thinking about how Dallas works and doesn't. So the city set up 2 tax increment financing districts on the north side of downtown, State Thomas and City Place. So to make sure no one felt left out, the city created 2 tax increment financing districts on the south side, which was Cedars and Oak Cliff Gateway. The ones on the north side had what I would consider the recipe for success. The property was assembled. There were very few property owners. The people that owned the property had the means and the money and the experience, and they had money to put into plans, and they could get the job done. In Oak Cliff Gateway, the original part, property was owned by a million different people, and there are properties that were in receivership where you couldn't find the heirs to even purchase a property. In State Thomas, you're situated between the Arts District and Turtle Creek and ultimately Highland Park. In the Cedars, you're situated from the convention center, which faces the other direction, doesn't even have a door on the Cedar side of downtown. And, the area south of the Cedars is some of the worst urban area that you're going to find in this region. So you look for areas, if you want to do redevelopment, and the thing that I think the city learned out of this whole process, looking at that original district, is, you want to find land that's assembled, you want to have people that are ready to develop it, you want, money coming in so new taxes are generated for the city, you want to capitalize on city investment. The Oak Cliff Gateway district was set up thinking that the city was going to build a park in Trinity. That was in 1992. I had hair then. I'm still waiting.
It may happen someday, but maybe not in our lifetimes.
But you capitalize on things that, positive things, positive investment from the city. Developers that are going to be spending their money and taking risks that the city, shouldn't be taking. And, so, a lot of our rules on how we looked at if TIF districts are going to be successful, we looked at, this original part and said this isn't going to work. When we looked at, extending the district to the Bishop Arts area, we had projects lined up that were going to create $100+ million of new investment ready to go as soon as we set up the district, and that's happening. So the thing that we learned that was unexpected was, you can't just designate an area as a redevelopment area without having the private sector ready to go and ready to invest. And there's certain things in the real estate market that just because the city, and in fact, I think by setting up the district, the city made things worse, because what we did is we increased the value of the property because we said we're going to put money, we're going to invest money into this property. So people who were not real estate investors said, hey, my property isn't worth $100,000, it's worth $1 million. And then nothing happened for 20-some years till we expanded the district out to north. There are some projects, I'm very proud of Lake Cliff Tower, which I think who knows what would have happened to that without some incentives there. But it's you have to look at the consequences and designated areas of reinvestment zone from the city isn't always going to be a real positive thing. You have to pick and choose, and if you're going to designate something, have the developers and the private sector ready to go.
So one of the areas, and I've I did send a couple of the maps of some of your areas to give them a little bit of background. The Old Town area in Louisville has had a lot of focus, a lot of city investment, private investment. It's really got a lot of cool stuff happening there now. And then the DCTA station is just a little far. So
Next up, the manufacturing.
yeah, so to the point that I think one of you made about having particular kind of nodes, but a bigger fabric. So what kind of advice would you have for thinking about how to ultimately knit that DCTA and the activity coming from DCTA over to Oldham?
So people here look younger than me, but if you remember Fort Worth, like in the early 80s, one thing that's very important is you don't figure out one corridor, so from the train station to where there's good development, and figure out a way to fill in the blanks. If you look at Fort Worth, there was a convention center, there was the courthouse, and Main Street between that, the Basses made an effort to fill up every building to make it look nice so people could walk back and forth. And in 1981, if you walked a block off of Main Street, there wasn't much there. So the key is, if you want to figure out a limited scope where you're not spending your money, one project on, Purnell, or one project on College, but take one street, try the best to change the zoning and fix up things along it, so you create a core that people can drive down and say, hey, this is something that's going to happen, and then the redevelopment effort will spin off of that.
Do you have a downtown director?
You mean like a district?
Yes.
Director?
Yeah.
No, but we have, I'm looking over here, Mika Reineke is the economic development and planning director, and Richard Dukey. The two of them are really the key people involved in those areas, so I'm looking for them.
Well, I tell you what, your district, I think a director, it would be very, very important for your guys to consider. I think that's really what got us down to Waxahachie. And really got us. They had a really great director. I don't know the program, Carl, but I know that the city.
I think it may be Main Street USA. I think Waxahachie.
And then when we started going over to Ennis and purchasing the properties, they then got a downtown director that really helped. And I think that, I'm not entirely familiar with the connection that you're talking about. How far distance would it be between that you're talking about?
Maybe less than 5 blocks.
Oh, wow, okay. So you can do a lot of things. I think you probably already have some events of some type, but I would say start to, with your downtown director or that person, start programming events and getting the food trucks there. Food trucks bring people. You'll see what it does at Clyde Warren Park tomorrow. And that was one of the food truck was born in Manhattan, where there's a bunch of vacant lots and kind of a bad part of town. And so the real estate guy started putting food trucks over there, and people started coming, and it created traffic. And then they started walking by these storefronts, and then the storefronts got fixed, and the storefronts got leased. So those kind of things, I think programming events, your monthly or quarterly events with pop-ups and fairs and that sort of thing would be my recommendation.
I would even consider those little golf carts that you're able to use, or the shuttle people, the e-frogs. The e-frogs would be more than glad to come to Louisville, I'm sure they would.
I'm looking over at James Kunke because we've talked about EFROG.
I think the concept of the corridor and just trying to get something started to make that connection, whether it's investments in the streetscape, which you may have already made, just the more attractive it is, the more activated it will become.
And just one more if you haven't, there's a gentleman here that we work a lot with. His name's Jason Roberts. He has a group called Build a Better Block, and he goes to communities like you and does demonstrations, and he could with an event, he'll program it and do demonstrations on how you do the complete streets on a temporary basis. So that would be one recommendation.
I have kind of an abstract question. Let me see if I can phrase this. So if you look back at the history of Jefferson and Davis, let's take Davis. So at one time it was Highway 80, and so it had, when it built up, it had both residential and transient demand. And then it kind of went through a transition when 80 died, and now it was just residential demand, and then it died. It just died. You started bringing this back. At the time you brought it back, knowing that transient demand was not really there, did you foresee the shift? And today, when I look at it, I see that most of the demand is really actually transient. A lot of the residents are aging population. So although there's younger people, I mean, I get it, but you still have a mix of aging population. Did you foresee the shift? And am I correct in assuming that shift occurred?
I guess the answer, I think we hoped that it would improve in terms of the quality of folks over there. I don't think we necessarily foresaw it.
Okay.
I've got a question. So in our old town, we have a mixed-use 2 district, which provides developers a lot of flexibility. We also have light industrial right next door. So we don't have a PD that covers, we have not done proactive. As developers, I'm interested, I think the council is interested. Tomorrow we're going to really decide what's our next step into what we're going to do with regard to rezoning Old Town. Can you talk about how development predictability for neighbors next door is important? Is that important to you? Does that increase your risk for investment if there's light industrial right next door? And then the other thing I'm interested in, I think council is interested in hearing, is what is the process? So if we do proactively rezone, can you talk about the process that you guys went through for rezoning Davis Street and with multiple property owners with different interests, and how corralling all of those different interests, what that experience was?
So how do uses that may not complement each other work, and how does that fit into zoning that you either have or want to change? So I think a great model is what we did down the design district. It was PD 621, the Dallas Design District. We were very active in getting that started back in, David, 2002. I think we started 2003. We amended it. But that was an all warehouse district, total warehouse district, about 400 acres, total warehouse district at the time. I built the first residential project down there, Trinity Loft, back in 2005. And that was a mixed-use zoning, which had a shared, it's very, very important, and David mentioned it a little bit, but very important on these projects to have a shared parking analysis, or shared parking application, where, because you're going to have residents that are going to be there just at nighttime, and then you're going to have business folks on the first floor. They're just going to be there during the daytime, so there needs to be an arrangement where you don't have to 100% park it for those uses. And then I think over time, the industrial uses, basically in the design district, the large warehouses are now breweries. And it's all built out of showrooms. And again, it took a long time. About 25 years for it to change, but it's all built out, and now all the warehouses on Levy Street are turning into homes, where they're spending $300 a square foot to renovate them. So the warehouse is, I think maybe what you do is you put some flexibility on the zoning, so that as it moves forward, that it could be something else.
But to answer your question about how it happened, the city council people appointed 12 people to a board. 6 of them were residents of the area, and the other 6 were business communities. So the city council wanted to make sure that there was representation on the residential side and also on the commercial side. And that PD, I've been involved on both PDs, the Oak Cliff Gateway PD, and also the Davis Land Use Study PD, and the Jefferson PD.
I've been pretty much been involved in almost every PD that's been created in Oak Cliff, and just due to the fact that it was important for me to be able to educate myself to see what type of uses were going to go in there. And really, honestly, when you're creating a PD, you're making decisions on other people's land. So you want to make sure you have the representation on both sides, the residential component, the residential and the business community.
Sure. And I think having the stakeholder group is critical. I mean, it's not really something the city can dictate. And getting that participation, both the design district was a great example where it was primarily, only at the time, commercial property owners, right? And the design, when we say the design district, we're talking about that Lower Stemmons industrial between 35 and the levee, which is an older commercial area. So you heard my caution about form districts before. So the good thing about form districts, I think, in response to your question, is the integration of uses is not bad. What we've seen repeatedly, not only in the design district, but even perhaps as one of these days we are going to expand it to the north, is a repeatable desire for folks to live in their workplace. So one of the initial adaptive reuses we've seen in that industrial area are artist lofts, if you will, or artists or studios, where it's not multifamily. I mean, it's literally one dwelling unit. So that creates kind of a zoning issue for us that we always think of mixed use as multifamily, and sometimes we leave the single family out because we're worried about compatibility. But I think you do need to allow for that conversion of those uses to allow live-work ability, and designing live-work units with apartments with workspace. Forcing that to happen doesn't seem to work. I think the more likely scenario is in these industrial areas that you may have on the perimeter of your downtown area, where you can encourage folks that might want to have a work studio, whether it is art or whether it's manufacturing, candle making, food processing, all of those things. You'll frequently find that folks want to live where they work if they're a small shop. It provides them security and just eliminates some of the financial burden of doing it. So I think from that perspective, the lesson of the form district is very positive. These uses can coexist commonly, and just allow for that.
We have time for one more question after this. I'm going to ask Nika. Nika's the one that's been the most involved in the development issues in this leading.
I was just going to say that, design district is different than, from what I can tell, the businesses on the east side of Louisville. And, it looked to me that most of those are going concerns, and, how you create a market where people are going to want to find something better to do with the buildings, and they're pretty big buildings too. And, maybe there's a unique use or something that's going to create a destination in and of itself.
How do you create that market? What do you create it, or do you? Get your gym to come in. I know. So that was one of my questions. Well, one thing I just want to comment on is that I'm sitting here feeling really good because many things that you have mentioned we've already done or in the process of doing. We have flexible zoning, we've reduced parking standards, we're putting in infrastructure. So a lot of ingredients are there. My question to you is, what ingredients do you look for when you go into buying property in downtown? That question, why did you pick Waxahachie, for instance, over Louisville? No pressure.
Well, Amanda, you're the one that started this.
I think creating an incentive for redevelopers to come in. I know that the city of Ennis, how they got us to go there is they created an incentive for us. They were going to pay 20% of our expense in construction, and so they're not only, and the reason they're doing their infrastructure, that was part of it. That was something that they, as we were working, because it took us 2.5 years to build that relationship. And really, we would have bought more. They have a lot more building stock. We just weren't able to purchase it because the minute people found out we were coming, the prices went up so high, and it was impossible for us to do it. So we were at 11 buildings, so the city is going to be paying 20%. They created an incentive program, and they're paying 20% of our construction costs. They not only did it for us, they ended up opening it up for all the other building owners that owned it. They were either going to redevelop themselves or sell the building. And when we started purchasing down in Waxahachie, we were purchasing at $30 a square foot. If you go there now and try to purchase something, it's at $143 a square foot. Same thing with Ennis. When we started buying, it was at the 30s, 28, and now it's like over $100 a square foot. So creating an incentive, it has to be a public-private partnership in order for it to work. And I say that not just with, it's more expensive to redevelop than to build from the ground up. It's like Pandora's box. You don't know what you're going to get into until you start, taking the building down to the bones, and you start finding out a lot. So creating a public-private partnership would be great, and then also the zoning that you guys already have working on to be more flexible.
Well, I hope you will join me in giving a round of applause to the panel. I know that we've been here all day long and we have not yet checked into the room, so I'm going to see if Gina or somebody will talk about that. And then we are going to go on the bus from here to Tillman's, and I think we'll leave at 6. Probably. We are going to go on a route. I'm hoping that we will be able to see a number of the areas that we've been talking about. And several or most of the panelists are going to be joining us at dinner. So we'll be able to continue this conversation informally at dinner. And they're going to come with us on the bus, so they'll be able to talk about some of the things along the way as well. So Donna, Gina?
So we will be in the junior ballroom tomorrow. So that will be at 8:30. Do take all of your private stuff with you because we'll be obviously totally moved down of here this evening. I know most of you have not checked into your room, so I think Eric has spoken to them at the front desk and they're expecting you. So if you could go and check out, and then you'll have a little bit of time. The bus is out front. It's waiting for us, so we will roll out of here at 6 p.m.